Alright, what up everybody? It's Cold Nerdy Core, back again with another video. This one's going to be another gaming countdown video. So this video was a video suggested by Zapkey Gaming again. Thanks for the suggestion. So this one's going to be the top 5 consoles and handhelds. It's going to be a combined list. So this is going to be my personal favorite consoles and handheld that I own and use. The game consoles and handhelds that I'm ranging from is basically from the 5th generation on, so this will be like PS1 generation up. That's really when I've been playing games, so anything below that in terms of generations of consoles, I never really got into or delved into too much. I've played a couple of the consoles, but I've never been really into like collecting and playing the games myself. So for this specific countdown, I'm going to be using a tier system. So I've basically made 5 categories for what I think a good game console should have. One is the games, so that's overall game library, and also my thoughts on how good the game library is. So it's not really based on how big the game library is, it's the quality of it. But also the size does play a factor in it, so I'll tell you how big the size are, and then I'll tell you like some of my favorites out of each of them, and then rank it based on my experience with the library. Next is exclusives. So this basically covers all the games that are specifically only released on a console, the specific console I'll be talking about. So next up is game exclusives. So these will be basically ranked the same way as games are ranked. So basically I'll be looking at, first off, how many exclusives are on the console. So I'll give you a rough estimate of what I could find on how many exclusives there are. And then the main part of it's the quality of the exclusives. So I'll basically going over what exclusives I like particularly on the console, and basically the ranking on this will depend on how much personally I like the exclusives on the console. So a lot of this is very much just my opinion. This whole thing's my opinion. So next will be the console look itself. So I think it's important that a console has a good design. I think it makes it sitting on your shelf look a lot better, and also makes it more collectible and more desirable to collect them rather than just having the single console. After that's the interface. I think this is one of the more important ones. Basically, the interface will cover how the console functions once it's turned on, the menus, memory, how much memory you get off the start, how you get extra memory, and the functionality of just operating the console day by day type thing. And then finally, I think is probably one of the most important ones is the controller. So for playing any console, you need a good controller. If the controller is garbage, you're not going to play the console that much. So I'll be going over the controllers and listing my favorites, and if it's a handheld, it'll just be how the handheld feels as a controller for games. So for all these sections, I'll be giving a tier list, basically ranking them 1 to 5. Before we get on the video, just remember this is just my opinion. It's my personal take on what my favorite consoles are and what I play. So coming in at number 5 is the PlayStation Vita. Now the Vita is a console that I personally love. I like the feel of it. It plays really well. There's a lot of great games for the console. But mainly the lack of support for the console is really what killed it. It's basically, I think, predicted to be out of physical releases by Sony by 2019. So this console basically is 5th on my list, mainly because of the support for the console. So for games, I have it ranked 5th out of the 5 on my list. This is mainly due to, again, the lack of support for the console and how quickly it got drummed out. And so for the games I chose to highlight, the games on the console that aren't exclusives. First I got BlazBlue Continuum Shift Extended. The reason I chose this one to help show my love for the console is that I think fighting games are particularly one of the best things that the Vita does well. I think fighters play really well on this. There's not as much going on the screen on a fighter, so the PS Vita can handle it beautifully, and you don't really need to dumb down the graphics at all. The only ones that really dumb down the graphics are Mortal Kombat and like the Street Fighter Cross Tekken ones. All the 2D style ones are basically the same. They look great on the console, they play well. The fighting communities are usually pretty good on the Vita, at least when it was up when the games first came out. Next I chose Need for Speed. I believe that the Vita also handles racing games really well, like some of the other good ones are Mod Nation Racers, Sonic All-Star Racing Transformed. I think the Vita handles it really well, and I think the portability of racing games I think is one of the best because it's a great pick up and play style of game. So that basically makes racing games a must own on the console for me personally. And next up was Assassin's Creed Liberation. This is a game that wasn't exclusive, now isn't. So this game basically for me summarizes how well the console can handle full-size games. So basically I went into this not thinking it was going to be as good as other Assassin's Creed games because they would have to dumb down a lot of the game size and the game feel to make up for the portable handheldness of the console. To my surprise, it actually handles it really well and plays exactly like an Assassin's Creed game. So I just put this one on the list to show how well the console can handle full-size games. And next up is the exclusives. I actually had the PS Vita ranking 3rd in exclusives. I think the PS Vita, in terms of its library, has some great exclusives that are definitely worth picking up the console for. So coming in first is Killzone Mercenaries. So the Killzone franchise is a PlayStation exclusive, but this is one that's specifically exclusive to the PS Vita, and I think it is, in my opinion, the greatest way to show off how well the PS Vita can handle full-size games. This game runs amazing. It's a full-size Killzone game with, I think, 6 or 7 missions. It plays really well. The dual analog sticks make first-person shooters feel really good on the console, and it definitely shows how graphically superior the PS Vita is compared to any other handheld on the market. So next up is one of my personal favorites, which is Hot Shots Golf Worlds Invitational. I basically talk about Hot Shots in any PlayStation video I can talk about it because I love Hot Shots, and this one in my opinion is the best out of all of them. So it's basically just one of the favorite fun, very arcadey sports games that's great to play on the console, and definitely I would recommend picking up. Next up is basically the one-shop system seller of the console, which is Persona 4 Golden. This is a remake of the Persona 4, which was on I think the PlayStation 2, if I'm not mistaken. And this basically is an amazing game, amazing RPG, and they basically fixed it up, added some new elements to the game, and re-released it on the PlayStation Vita. And I've put like hundreds of hours into this game, and it's definitely worth it. I would buy a Vita just based on getting this game. So next up is the console look. On console look, I gave it 3rd. I really like the look of the PlayStation Vita. It's kind of simple, that's why it wasn't higher on my list, but it really fits for a portable style console. So basically on the back you have the touchpad, and it's just like an oval design. Feels really good in your hands and is not too big and not too bulky. It doesn't really have much weight to it. It's pretty light. This is the heavier edition. This is the first one. This, I guess, the fat version, if you would call it that. There's also a slim version out which is lighter, but these ones have the better screen. So next is the interface on the PlayStation Vita. The PlayStation Vita interface is basically like a phone's interface. You basically have a little bunch of app bubbles and you click on it and then it will access the game. You put in your card at the top and that will power up your game. Then you launch the game from the app screen basically. And the memory at the start is very small, and the memory cards for these are really, really expensive for some reason, and they're very hard to come by, honestly. So for those reasons, I put it 5th on the list in terms of interface. And finally, I have it 3rd on the controller list. To hold it in your hands actually feels really good. The dual analog sticks definitely make it a lot easier to play bigger games and games that were meant for consoles or at-home consoles. So I would definitely put this 3rd on my list. For fighting games and racing games specifically, it feels amazing to play with. Alright, so coming in at number 4 is this big honking thing. Is the original Xbox. Can't really call it the Xbox One anymore because of stupid Xbox. But this is definitely my console of choice when it came to, would that be the 6th generation of consoles? So is this either this or the PS2? This honestly came down to, I played the Xbox more as a kid. So a lot of the games I have and a lot of my favorites as a kid are on the Xbox, on the PlayStation 2. Overall in total games, I have this ranked 2nd. I think the 6th generation of consoles has one of the biggest libraries and one of the best libraries of games. So some of my favorites I picked out on the Xbox is first off Street Football. This generation of consoles was when arcade sports games were at its peak. There were so many games like the NBA Jam games, the Street games, Ballers games. There was the backyard football and hockey and stuff like that. So, and this is really one of my favorite genres of games. So it was a no-brainer for me to pick up a bunch of them. And then after that, I have the Star Wars games. So this was basically the main reason why this was on this list is all these Star Wars games that came out during this era, like the Battlefront, Star Wars Commando, Knights of the Old Republic, Jedi Outcast, and the movie tie-in games were all really good, and I was huge into Star Wars. These were all really big games for me, and I still go back and play these all the time, especially Battlefront and Republic Commandos being my two favorite out of the things. So these two, along with some of the other games that were in this generation of consoles, basically carries this game library to be my second favorite in total. Next up is exclusives. Overall, the Xbox has 95 exclusives on the console physically released out of the 1,040 roughly games on the console. So this basically puts it 5th on my list, mainly because of the quality of the exclusives. The quality of the exclusives are really good. They're just not ones I particularly find interesting for me. So some of my favorites on the console though for their exclusives that I have is first off you have Midtown Madness 3. This is a very good arcadey racing game, and it's one I played a lot as a kid, so I would definitely recommend picking this up. So next up is Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball. This is a game that I didn't think was actually going to turn out to be a lot of fun playing it. I got it for $5, so I was like, alright, I'll give it a shot. But the volleyball mechanics are actually really good in this game, and I think in terms of games actually released that include volleyball in it, I think this is the best. And then finally got Fable. Fable's a really good RPG franchise that's been exclusive for the Xbox, and in my opinion, Fable 1 is still the best out of all of them. I think they get worse as they've been released, and Fable 1 still holds to be the best on the console. So next up is the console look. So for the console look, I gave it 5th on the list. It really just is a big hunkin' box with a green Xbox symbol in the middle. The front's just kind of flat and just has it's simple. It works for the console. I don't hate it. It's pretty nice, but out of the other consoles on this list, I think it's the worst. Then next would be interface. For the Xbox, I actually give it number 1 because I think does simplicity the best, and also comes with a really good internal hard drive in terms of the amount of memory you get out of it. For the interface for the Xbox, it's basically just a bunch of different like slots type thing. It comes up like a wheel type thing, and it has like games, your memory, storage settings, and a bunch of other options. And it's just very simple and works really good. So for that reason, I gave it number 1. Simplicity is usually what carries a console's interface for me personally, because I just want to play games on it. Then finally, we got controllers. For controller, I gave it 5th. So for the controllers, I basically look like this. These are the like off-brand ones. There's the original Xbox ones, which are basically just a little bulkier, and they're black and smooth all the way around. That one broke on me, so I have one of the off-brand ones. So these ones are pretty decent. They still operate basically the same as like a 360 controller or something like that. They still look the same as a 360 or Xbox One controller, just with slight differences in it. For me, I've always found Xbox controllers very bulky. I have big hands, but I prefer like the PlayStation style or GameCube style where you can like wrap your whole hand around it. I've always find these as pretty heavy and bulky compared to other ones, so it just makes it feel not as good in my hands, in my opinion. Alright, so coming in at number 4, we have the PS3. Now this is the launch edition of the console. I got it for day 1. So I'll be judging the interface and look based on the base model of the PS4. I don't have any of the special editions or the slim editions, at least at this point. So for games overall, I have it ranked 3rd on my list. I believe it's kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of the top 5 systems I'm talking about. It's hard to find the exact amount of physical releases because there's so many digital releases, but I guess there was like roughly 700 to 800 at the moment. I looked at the list and then I tried to figure out how many were disc related. So I'm just going to go over some of my favorites on the list. In my opinion, RPGs are still the best thing on the console. I believe that most of the best games on the console happen to be RPGs, and a lot of the other genres of games that were once popular on the 6th generation or 5th generation have kind of fallen off, like racing games or like the arcade sports games that I like, or hack and slash is not as big, that type of thing. So to start off, I got what I think is the best RPG on the console and is honestly one of the best games on the console, is Witcher 3. I would definitely recommend picking this up. This one shows the graphical capabilities of the PS4 and also is a really fun experience. And even if it's just your introduction to the series, like it was mine, you can still get into the story and you can really fall in love with the characters and the world of this game. So next up we got Prey. Prey is a first-person RPG set in like a space station that like aliens took over. It's a very interesting and dark take on an RPG and has a pretty good story. The only thing is some of the quests can get tedious and the running around's a little tedious at times. But it's kind of like a stealth RPG in that you have very limited resources, so you gotta maneuver around carefully in order to not get into combat that much of the time in order to conserve your energy and stuff. And finally we got Persona 5. Now Persona series is a series that I just got into recently in terms of the overall series. I played Persona 4 on the Vita, and that one's still my favorite out of the series, but Persona 5 is still a really good game. The story is interesting, characters are good, and I just think it's a little under Persona 4, but still very worth getting. Alright, so for exclusives, I have the PS4 coming in at 4th on the list. The reason it's 4th is that there's not too many, only at 72 at the moment, and like around 72. And the exclusives, in my opinion, don't really interest me as much as other consoles in terms of the amount that interests me. There's still some really good ones on the console, just in my opinion not as good as some of the other consoles on this list. So starting off with one of the ones I just played recently is Horizon Zero Dawn. This is like a complete edition. So this one's kind of like a open world RPG style of game. It kind of follows the Shadow of Mordor style of games where you kind of run around, find a quest, do the quest. There's a lot of exploration, crafting, and the story is really good in this game actually. Aloy, who's the main character in this game, is actually really interesting, and the world's pretty good. And some of the characters you meet are actually pretty good. I thought, usually with these open RPGs that are just mainly focused on action, they suffer in the story department, but this is one of the games that doesn't. Next up is Infamous Second Son. In my opinion, this is the best exclusive still on the console. It was one of the earlier released ones on the console. I think it came out the year or the year after of the launch of the PS4. I still think in terms of gameplay-wise, story-wise, and just how much fun this game is, it's like an action hack and slash game with some third-person shooting mechanics built in. And it has a RPG style tree system for your abilities and stuff like that, and there's so many different abilities to get in this game which make it very interesting, and there's still the good and bad way that the Infamous games are famous for, so there's always replayability with this game. So next up is The Order 1886. This is a game that I actually think is underrated. A lot of people hate on this game due to the length of the game and the lack of action in the game in terms of actually playing. In my opinion, I can't excuse the game being too short. I think the game is too short. It's like maybe a solid 5 hours of gameplay. But the story sections being too big, I kind of disagree with, because I think this is a story-driven game and it was meant to be a story-driven game. And I believe that this game is carried by its story, and the story is actually very interesting to me. So I'm hoping they release a second one of these. Now for the console's look. In my opinion, the PS4 is the second best looking console on this list. I really like, it's simple in that it's a box design, but it has like the slant at the front, and there's the shiny side with the more matte side, which I think looks nice. And it's mainly just the front and the kind of ingrained cut throughout the whole thing. I think it just is simple, but yet looks smooth. And for interface, I got this 4th. My opinion kind of suffers at the same thing the Vita does, where it kind of just has a bunch of pointless shit that they make you add on to your console that I don't even want on my console, and there's no way to delete it. And also, the memory of the base model is only 500 gigabytes, so I can basically fit like 10 games, and if I was to get Red Dead, I could fit like 3 games on the console. So that's definitely a big hinder for this. But you can always get like towers or terabyte drives that can fix that problem. Alright, so now onto the controller. The controller, in my opinion, for the PS4 is the best controller that I find to play with. The reason for this is that it's the PS3 controller basically, just the arms have been
stuck out more, so they have more length to grip onto the controller. And also I like the back buttons more than the PS3. The PS3 one seems to jam more than this one. This one I haven't had any issues with the buttons actually jamming up or the sticks wearing out as much as the PS3 so far. So in my opinion, this one's the best. And I also like the touchpad. I think some games use it better than others, but the games that use it right, it's actually very interesting to use. Alright, so coming out at number 2 is the Nintendo GameCube. Now the GameCube is one of my personal favorite consoles because it's the first console I ever owned myself that wasn't like a family shared console type thing. So I got the GameCube really late in the life cycle. I got it just as it was about to be like cleared off the shelves, and they were all on like those clearance racks in like Best Buys or EB Games or stuff like that. So I don't have the biggest GameCube collection, but it's definitely a collection that I love. So for games overall, I have it 4th on the list. It kind of suffers from the same thing the Vita did, in the lack of support and how quickly it got drummed out of being games being released for the console. In total, it has around 550 games, which is not huge of a library, especially compared to other consoles of the same generation like the PS2 and original Xbox. That being said, it still has some amazing games on the console. So for first up, I got Death Jam Vendetta Fight for New York. This is a fighting, like kind of like the old school WWE style of games, but it's more like a street style, and it's about like all these famous rappers, and you can fight them and make your own character and go up through the streets proving yourself type thing. It's a really fun game. The music's really good if you're into rap, and the gameplay is really fun. So next up is NBA Street Volume 2. As I stated many times before, the arcade style of sports games is one of my favorite genres, and the NBA Street is definitely the pinnacle of the basketball games. In my opinion, the second one, the Volume 2, is the best. It's very arcadey, very fast-paced, 3-on-3. There's legends, current players, at least for the early 2000s, and mainly the gameplay is what carries this game. There's a lot of different modes too. There's like a career mode where you make your character, upgrade them, upgrade your team through pickup games you play, and then take on NBA teams. So it's a really fun game. Alright, so then we have my favorite game of all time, which is SSX3. In my opinion, this is the perfect racing, snowboard, skateboard game combo, in that it has because snowboard and, why I say snowboard and skateboarding games is because snowboard and skateboard games kind of have the same mechanics always ingrained in them. It's either the buttons to do flip tricks or they use the sticks. In my opinion, this gets the controls the best. It uses the pad for the GameCube to do like the spins and stuff, and the buttons and right triggers to do the grabs and tricks. So I think the GameCube controller actually helps this game a lot when it comes to the controls. And the racing is fast paced. There's not really much lag on the console. The only thing is in the Peak 1 race, there's a little bit of lag when there's like this avalanche part, and the console kind of freaks out during that part. But other than that, it's completely smooth. All the riders have different accessories and a lot of customization, and the riders interact with each other down the track. It's just a lot of fun. Alright, so next up are the exclusives for the GameCube. The exclusives on my list came in second. I think the GameCube has a very good selection of exclusives on the console. Nintendo usually does very well with their exclusives. For the Nintendo GameCube, there's 88 exclusives roughly for the console. That makes up a good portion of the library for the console, with only being around 550 games. So I'm just going to highlight some of my favorites. So first up is Battle on Wars. This is a RTS third-person shooter style of game where you can take a overview, bird's eye view of your units, and then also turn into one of the units and command them from your third-person screen. And it has a lot of like rock paper scissors mechanics of a basic RTS, where like the tanks are beaten by the rocket units are beaten by the assault rifle units are beaten by the flamethrower units type thing. So it has a very basic style of RTS gameplay, but it's still pretty hard and challenging, and it's just a lot of fun. So next up is Mario Strikers. Again, another arcade sports game, and this one in my opinion is the best soccer iteration of a arcade game we've ever had. So this is the first of the Strikers series. I think there was one also on the Wii if I'm not mistaken. So this game is really fun, very fast paced, a lot of iconic characters that all play roughly the same but have their own unique ways and feels about how they play. Alright, so next up is Metroid Prime. This is just one of the best shooters on the console, and in my opinion is one of the reasons to get the console. It's very fun, very dark shooter, and has a lot of puzzle mechanics, so if you're into that, I would definitely recommend. Alright, so next up is the console look. Now for the GameCube, I gave it number 1 on the list for a couple of reasons. One, I really like the compact design of the GameCube. It means you can fit a bunch of consoles on the same shelf as the GameCube, and it also looks very sleek and doesn't really take up too much extra space. The other thing is the colors for the GameCube. I like that you can get multiple colors for the GameCube, and it's not just black, white. That's usually like the standard for most other consoles. You can get like the blue, the orange, all the other different colors. So if you ever wanted to collect all the different colors, you can do that. I just have the platinum one because I don't really have the money to go after all the different colors of GameCubes. And for interface, I got it second. I believe this is another one that simplicity just wins out for me. The console screen is basically just set up in 4 quarters. You got your settings, you got your games, like when you want to play them, you got your memory at the bottom, and then the right's something else. I forget what it is. But it's very simple, works really well, and definitely the memory is the only thing that holds us back with not having any memory on the console, and you have to buy the memory cards, which are decently cheap compared to other game systems, but they're slowly going to rise in price due to them not being made too much anymore. Then finally we got the controller. Now for the controller for the GameCube, I gave it second. The reason I give it second over like something like the Xbox controller is that the it's still a bigger size, so it fits my hands better, but it has all this part at the back hollowed out, and it makes the controller a lot lighter in your hands. And also the shape of the sticks at the back here definitely make it easy to rest your hands on, and I think it just feels good in your hands. And also I really like the D-pad spot for this. I think it works really well and is very easy to access, and the triggers are some of the best feeling triggers on any console. And the only thing that this controller has lacking is that there's no other Z, or like what would be a bumper button for most other consoles, so shooters kind of suffer in that regard. Alright, so coming out at number 1, this is a console that if you watch any of my other videos on my channel, you could probably figure out that it was going to be number 1 just based on how many games I have for it and the amount I talk about it. So that's the PS3. In my opinion, the PS3 is the best console on the system, and I only got into it like 2 or 3 years after it came out, so I was a little late to the party on this console actually. I was originally into the Xbox 360, but my family started to use that one more than me, so we had this just sitting there laying around, so I was like, I'll give it a shot. And then I just fell in love with the console, and mainly at the time the free online, which was awesome for the console, and I played a lot of Call of Duty and stuff like that on the console, so that's what really got me into this game system and starting to collect for it. So then after that it just spiraled into, I got into RPGs off of this era of consoles, specifically with the PS3 with Skyrim. This console has the best lineup of shooters in my opinion out there, which shooters are my favorite games, first person shooters specifically. I think exclusives, it has a great library of exclusives and has a huge library of games by itself. So those are some of the reasons why this is my favorite console of all time, and I'll get into the nitty gritty of all of that right now. Alright, so first up are the games, and for the games for the PS3, I think the game library is the best out of the 5 that I'm talking about. The only library I could see beating it would possibly be the PS2, but the PS2 isn't on this list, so this one's number 1. For me, just the size and quality of the library, coming in around 1,400 games, with a lot of them being very good games, and some that I still need to collect, that I just want to collect just to play because there's so many games that I'm interested on the console. So the first one I'm going to talk about specifically is Bayonetta. Bayonetta is the reason I got into hack and slash games. Before, like the early God of War games or the Metal Gear Rising or any of the games like that, I could just never get into them. But Bayonetta was a lot of fun. I guess because they took the hack and slash game, well, the other two are very serious and very dark and have just kind of like a badass dude running around hitting shit as its story. This one adds a lot of comic relief and a lot of funny characters to the story. It also has like interesting stories with the angels and demons kind of thing. I find it a little more interesting than the other stories, which is the main reason I got into this one. So as I said before, shooters are the best thing on the console in terms of the amount of quality ones on the console. And in my opinion, the BioShock ones are one of the best, if not the best, on the console. These are very dark and atmospheric styles of first-person shooters. So basically in this one you play in Rapture, and the main thing that sets us apart from other shooters is the story and the characters you meet in terms of the enemies are all very interesting and definitely keep you going throughout this game. And there's a perk like upgrade tree system. There's a lot of replayability and making sure you go back and get your items fully upgrading, trying all the different abilities that you didn't get to try fully maxed out in the game. So this is definitely a game I would recommend. So as I said before, RPGs are one of the other things that this console does really well, and the PS3 is the console that got me into RPGs. I was never into RPGs before. I was a COD kid who just played racing and shooting games. So this is definitely the console that broadened my perspective on gaming. And one of the best ones once I got into it is Dragon Age Origins. It kind of has a Knights of the Old Republic-ish style of gameplay where you kind of put in the input of the ability you want to use, then your character uses it after a certain amount of time, and the movement is very much controlled by just the AI movement. So the main thing that sets this apart from any other RPG on the console is the story and the characters. It's one of the things that BioWare does very well when it comes to the RPGs, including the Mass Effect games, is the character development and how you start off just barely knowing anything about the character besides its personality and the little bit of backstory, and then throughout going through their individual quests or bringing them along through the story, you get to know in depth about the characters and you learn to love the characters for the personalities that they bring along. And it also adds a much of replayability because certain characters are only optimal to play through on like a good guy storyline, and some characters are optimal to play through on the bad guy storyline. And depending on what class you go, you have to structure who you have in your party based on that. So there's tons of replayability when it comes to this game. Alright, so next up are the exclusives. The exclusives are another thing I have this console being first for. I think the PS3 has some of the best exclusives out there. There are roughly 190 for the console, which is a fair bit, and I'll be going through some of my favorites. So keeping with the shooter run is Resistance 3. In my opinion, this is a shooter that gets very overlooked on the console. The Resistance series is one of the best in terms of the exclusive library on the console. It's a very dark in terms of the storyline shooter that just has very, very fun combat mechanics, and it's one of these games that the story continues pretty well throughout the game and makes sense, and the combat and game mechanics just get increasingly better from 1 to 2 to 3, 3 being the best out of the series. And this is one I wish they would continue on the PS4 personally. Alright, so next up is another shooter for the console, and in my opinion is the best exclusive shooter for the console. It might be honestly one of the best shooters on the console period, and that's Killzone 3. This is another game series like Resistance where each game just improves on the combat mechanics, and Resistance 3 is the peak of that in my opinion. The multiplayer is very fun for this game when it was out. I don't know if it's still populated right now, but if it is, it's very fun. My favorite thing about these games is that the weapons feel unique in this game, in that they all have like a sway weight mechanic to it and have a heavier feel than most other games, so it sets the combat and guns apart in this game. And the story's pretty decent. It's just a regular like action style of game. There's bad guys, you're the good guys, you fight the bad guys, standard twists and stuff happen in this game. It's just to push the really good gameplay in the game. The next up is Infamous 2. So this, in my opinion, is the best Infamous game out on the PS3. There's two. There's this one and the first one. The first one, in my opinion, is not that great of a game. It gets the concepts well, but this one definitely picks up on the concepts and gets rid of some of the tedious aspects of the first game. So this is what got me into the Infamous games even more. I played the first one and I was really intrigued with the combat and the story of Cole, which is the guy in this one. And the second one really just blew me away. This is also the first game I platinumed, so it has that going for it. So yeah, very good game. Same thing as the one on the PS4, where it's a third-person hack and slash with some shooter mechanics in it. And the story is really good in this game as well. Alright, so next up is the console look. So in my opinion, the PS3 suffers from the same thing the original Xbox suffers from, and that is just freaking huge and freaking bulky. And it kind of just looks super huge on a shelf, which is alright, but in my opinion, I prefer the smaller, more sleek looking consoles. But I put it over the original Xbox because I like the front design of the console with the disc tray on the side, and the lack of a disc tray helps. Consoles with the disc tray I'm not a huge fan of. So it looks pretty good. It's really big and bulky. That's the only issue with this console. So next up is the interface. I got the interface at third. This is kind of the middle ground between the simplicity of the PS2 and going overboard with the PS4 and PS Vita. It still has some stuff that I just wish I could get rid of to save some memory on my console, but it's still very simple. It kind of has like a tree style system where you kind of slide over and then a tree will come up of the stuff relating to it. Alright, so next up is the controller for the console. So for the PS3, I gave it 4th on my list. The reason why I gave it 4th, especially when I gave the PS4 first on my list, is mainly the extension that the PS4 got, which is the bottom sticks here. They push that out, so it adds a nice length to controller, which makes it feel greater in your hands, especially with, I have pretty big hands, so the PS4 fits more comfortably. And also, I find a problem with the back triggers back here. I find they jam a lot for some reason. I don't know if that's just me. And I've had problems where the buttons kind of jam pretty easily on this one compared to other consoles. That's the only issues I have. That might just be the specific controllers that I have or issues with how I play with it. But overall, I give it 4th. It's still a very good controller and works really well. The PlayStation has always just kind of kept the same design because it works for them and it works really well. So that concludes my top 5 game consoles collection video. So thanks for watching, and I hope you guys really enjoyed. If you're new to the channel, I appreciate you guys stopping by. If you like what you saw, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting on the video. I try to get back to all comments. And yeah, thanks for watching, and remember, everybody has some nerdiness.